What I was really led by the Lord in my heart, and what I felt the Lord speak to me most of all was, especially as we were going through the stories of the Old Testament for the Sunday school children. For week after week, we've been going through the book of Samuel. We learned about King Saul, and now I think we're going through the stories of David. The more I spent time reading some of these, chapters on Saul's life, the more I was challenged as to how much there is for us to learn and be warned of. There are positives and negatives that we can learn from. And I think, as Brother Praveen was sharing earlier on, there's so much that we can guard ourselves by learning from the mistakes of others. I've heard Brother Zach say that, an ordinary man learns from his own mistakes, but a wise man learns from the mistakes of others, whereas a foolish man doesn't even learn from his own mistakes. And I think that was where I was personally exhorted to see that there were a lot of incidents in Saul's life that if I were careful, I could learn from them. I could take away a lot of things for my life in my present day today. And, scripture is full of examples. Every character, in one way or another has an example for us, whether we can learn from them or whether we can be warned of them. And Saul is one of those few examples who start out well. All of you probably know it. He starts out exceedingly well, and he finishes exceedingly bad. Now that, again, that's the first thing. It's easy to, it's possible to start well and finish bad. There are quite a few examples in scripture, and I think even in the New Testament we have Judas, who was a disciple when the Lord called him, but he became a traitor. He became someone who became ungodly, and he ended up on the wrong side. But the thing that stands out with Saul is there are so many minute aspects of what went on with him, of what was, what were the things that kind of led to greater and greater sin and greater areas of falling away from the Lord. So, which is why I felt it spoke to my heart a lot. And that's kind of what I'm going to be sharing today. We're going to be looking at some positive lessons from the life of Saul, and we're also going to be looking at some warnings from his life. So the first thing I wanted to talk about are 10 good qualities that we can learn. Now, I'm going to begin by referencing a lot of what I'm going to speak about from the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 9. This is the very first verse where Samuel actually comes into picture. And the thing that stands out to me there is that first verse. It says, there was a wealthy, influential man named Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. And he had a son. His name was Saul, and he was the most handsome man in Israel, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. So the very first thing that I learned about Saul is he was rich, he was tall, he was handsome, he was influential. His dad had a lot of wealth, and probably he was a powerful man in his tribe or whatever. And yet, I believe with all my heart, Saul was humble at that point. Because if he were not humble, again, I firmly believe the Lord would not have called him and led him to Saul to become, to be crowned king and to be anointed king. And that's really the first thing that I really want to learn from. It's like Bible, like we've heard from Brother Zach again. It is easy for God to bless someone, but it is hard for him to stay humble after he's been blessed. And that's the real, the first thing that stands out to me, that this man who was rich, he was handsome. I was just putting myself, if I had, far exceeding great wealth, or if I had far exceeding great position in my work, I truly would find it hard to, to kind of have a spirit of humility. And I think that is where the Lord continues to work in all of us. But that's the first thing that really stands out, that despite all of those things that he had with him, he was humble, and that is why I believe the Lord chose him there. The second point, or the second good quality that we can learn from Saul, is his willingness to serve. Now, again, right after the first introduction of what we hear about Saul, it says his dad, Kish, he actually lost a few donkeys. They strayed away. And he tells Saul, take a servant and go look out for the donkeys. Now imagine a 7-foot guy who is quite rich, wealthy, extremely handsome, and his dad says, "Go find out the donkeys where they are." The first thing that I would have expected him to say is, why don't you just send one of your servants? This is far too less and mean a job for me to do. I don't want to do it. And that's the thing that really stands out to me, that he was willing to serve at the meanest jobs, at the oddest jobs. It didn't matter what other people thought about him. Now, like we all know, a donkey is not one of those honorable, or one of those animals which is esteemed. It's not a horse or something like that. It was an invaluable animal, probably, or not as much of worth. And yet he said, that's okay. I'm going to do it for my father. Whatever I do, it is for my father. It is, I believe he had a tremendous love for his father. He had a tremendous love and respect. And that, again, is something that I can learn from. There is a lot that I can learn from. His willingness to serve. Quite often, especially, I've seen it in my home. There are certain things that I would think, hey, I shouldn't be doing that. It's someone else's turn to do it, not my turn to do it. But when I was thinking about this, it doesn't matter whose turn it is. If I can do it, and if I have the ability to do it, I should be willing to do it. I should be eager to serve, even if it meant, being a mean job, or being a job that no one else would honor. And that's, again, one of the things that I learned. The second thing that I really, wanted to learn from his example. The third example, again, is along the same line. So what happens? He takes his servant, goes out in search of the donkeys. And if you look at, again, 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 4, it says, he took his servants and traveled throughout the hill country of Ephraim and the land of Salisha, Salim, and the entire land of Benjamin. So it's not that he just crossed the street, went to the next neighborhood, or went to the next town and searched for the donkeys. It says he searched across the entire land of Benjamin. And it's a picture of what tells me that he was an extremely hard worker. It didn't matter if the donkeys were worthless. It didn't matter if it was a job not of honor or of respect. He was hard at work. And again, that's the picture that tells me he was not doing it unto himself. He was doing it unto his Father. And like we have that reference in the New Testament, whatever we do, do it as unto the Lord. And I was personally challenged in my work, because I've been doing the same job for quite a long time, and I haven't been getting a lot of the promotions or whatever career progressions that I was kind of hoping and expecting to get. And the Lord reminded me, you're not doing it unto your employer. Whatever you do, remember you're doing it unto me. It is me who is looking at it. It can be an odd job. The world may not recognize it. The world may not value it or appreciate it. But you are my child. And it's not just your life after work that matters to me. Your life between 9 a.m. in the morning and 5 p.m. in the evening, the work that you do at work, that matters to me too. So remember, whatever you do, do it as unto me. I will reward you. I will take care of whatever you need. And that was a challenge and encouragement for me to remember that it doesn't matter what the world appreciates or not. If I am faithful to the Lord, I have to make sure that I do all the things, be it at work, at home, wherever they may be, to the best of my abilities, and not cut corners or not think it's not important. So a little bit of work is enough. So that's the thing, again, I learned from the perspective of how Saul took this approach of going to look out for his donkeys. The next thing I learned there is his wisdom. Again, in 1 Samuel 9:6, what we read here is he searches for the donkeys left, right, and center, goes across the town and the whole country or the entire land of Benjamin, and he doesn't find the donkey anywhere. And then finally he says, you know what? It's enough now, because if I go searching more for the donkeys any further, my dad is going to get worried about losing me. He's going to think that I'm lost and I'm more important to him than these donkeys. So it's enough. I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to go back home just so that my dad doesn't start to worry about me. There's tremendous wisdom, in my opinion, there. And what does that tell me? That tells me that Saul feared God. There's the verse, I think, in Proverbs 4:3, it says, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Now, without him having a fear of God in his life, he wouldn't have had wisdom to say, I think it's time for me to stop looking for these donkeys and go back home so that my dad doesn't get worried. And that's again another encouragement and a challenge. Quite often, when I'm looking at some of the challenges or some of the things that I'm not very clear on how to do at work, I instantly, it doesn't come on to me instantly to say, Lord, give me wisdom there. I try to Google it up or look up or ask someone. But what this reminded me was, God is so faithful to give me wisdom in my work, in the things where I think, this is nothing, to do with the Lord, or this is nothing to do with serving Him. It's just a secular job or something like that. But even in those moments which are so mundane and so earthly, the Lord is faithful to help us and give us wisdom. And that comes by me fearing God. That comes by me honoring God and fearing Him in those innermost areas of my life. So again, it's a lesson that I can clearly see. Saul had that fear of God, and therefore he had wisdom to be able to say, I don't want to spend any more time because Dad's going to be worried about the donkeys. So that's the fourth thing that stands out to what I can learn from Saul. The next one I wanted to share was his desire or eagerness to honor elders. Again, same chapter, I think it's in verse 7. What happens is his servants tell him, Saul, before we go home, let's just go to Samuel. There's a prophet there. Let's go to him and ask him. He could tell us where the donkeys are. Let's just go and ask him. And the first thing that Saul replies is, he says, but we don't have anything to offer him. Even our food is gone, and we don't have anything to give him. Now, this again is a reminder of what goes in through his mind when his servant gives him this option. Let's go and talk to a prophet, a man of God who can help us. The first thing that Saul thinks is about honoring that man. He says, I don't have money. I don't have even food. I don't have even good food to honor him. And how can we go there? And that's again something that is quite subtle, but it tells me of his eagerness in his heart, the way he spoke to elders, or the way he esteemed and thought about people who were godly or prophets. It tells me that there was an element where he was always careful to honor God. And again, that's something that I can learn from. There are probably areas that I still need to be more sensitive. I still need to be more aware of how I can honor someone who is, who serves the Lord, or who ministers to me in a specific way. Is the first thought that comes to my heart is, how can I honor them? Or is the first thought that comes to my heart is, how can I be blessed by them? The verse that we've been, one of the verses that we've been listening and memorizing has been the verse in Acts where it says, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So Saul was more concerned about giving honor to Samuel than receive a blessing, than receive something from him in terms of where his donkeys were. Now, that is a spirit which I truly can find lacking in me. And I was encouraged and reminded that, it doesn't matter if I can say something or do something, but it's a desire in my heart to be willing to give honor, willing to give anything that can bless the other person, more than being willing to receive something from the other person. That was the fifth thing that really stood out from Saul's qualities, or some of the things that encouraged me from Saul. The next one was his low esteem about himself. Like we know in the story, they go to meet Samuel, and Samuel has already been told beforehand by God, saying, the people of Israel are asking for a king. I don't want you guys to have a king, but because you ask, I'm going to give you a king, and I'm going to send him to you at that point in time and place. And God sovereignly sends Saul to Samuel, and Samuel instantly knows that this is the man that God has anointed. And he tells Saul, don't worry about the donkeys. I'm here to tell you that you and your family are the focus of all of Israel's hopes. So indirectly, he tells him, you are going to be very important to the nation of Israel. And Saul's immediate response in verse 21 is, but I'm only from the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe in Israel, and my family is the least important of the families. So we see that he truly didn't see himself, even though he was rich, he was, tall, and all those things going on for him. He truly did not see himself as someone worthy for the whole of Israel to be looked up at. And the way I know that what he's saying is true is, if we read in Joshua, toward the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua, we see that the Benjaminites actually did a crime against a woman from the tribe of Levites. And the whole of Israel was terribly upset, and they wanted to punish the tribe of Benjamin. And they killed everyone from the tribe of Benjamin except 600 men, I guess. And they were like the smallest, the meekest. No one respected anyone from the tribe of Benjamin. And that is how I realized what he's saying is actually true. He's not saying this out of, trying to appear humble or trying to appear to have low esteem about himself. The tribe of Benjamin was genuinely the smallest tribe. And that's what he says. He says, I am of no significance. I am of no importance here. So why are you talking to me this way? Now, this is a very, important thing that I was challenged by. Do I see myself like that when the Lord uses me to do something or leads me to do something, or if someone encourages me or says something good about me? What is the first thing that comes to my heart? Do I genuinely say, I'm not talking about the words that come out. I can manufacture those words and appear to be humble. But what is it that's going on in my heart? Is it a spirit of, Lord, I truly don't deserve it. I truly cannot understand why this is being told of me. I think that's a lesson that I can learn from him, that his humility was genuine. His humility was absolutely genuine, where he had no high thoughts about himself. And that's something that I wanted to learn from, that I wanted to be, become true in my life, where at any given point, no matter however the Lord may use me, that I don't have anything where I can say to myself, yeah, that's something good about myself, or there I did something good for the Lord, and therefore, I can look at myself and say there's something good in me. I never want to be able to get to that point, and always want to have that spirit of humility. Another example there is, these are all things that point out to his, to the purity in his inside. So that's why I thought, these were things that really blessed my heart. In the same passage, I think in 1 Samuel 10 now. So this is where Samuel anoints Saul, tells him you're going to be king. And then after a while, I think Saul returns in chapter 10, verse 9. Saul, starts to return back. And as he comes back, his uncle meets him. His uncle, who is from his hometown, he meets him. And he says, where have you been, Saul? Where have you been all this time? And Saul's response is, again, something that encourages me. In verse 13, I think he says, we were looking for the donkeys, Saul replied, but we couldn't find them. So we went up to Samuel and asked where they were. And then the uncle says, what did he say? And to that he says, he told us that the donkeys had already been found. Saul replied, but Saul didn't tell his uncle what Samuel had said about the kingdom. This again is a picture of his humility. There was no boasting in Saul. He didn't tell his uncle, you know what, uncle, I met Samuel, and Samuel told me that, I'm going to become a very important person in the kingdom of Israel. And Samuel anointed me with oil. None of that was shared. And I think, again, it gives me a picture of his humility, where he didn't want to boast. He didn't want to brag about anything that the Lord may have led him to. He kept it hidden. He felt he had the wisdom that it's not important for me to share this right now. He had that wisdom, and he was faithful to stay humble even after all that had happened to him. Again, an encouragement to me. I can, especially when it's at home, it's easy for me to kind of speak in a way where I can think, I can project that perspective as if I'm important, as if I know something more than anyone else. And I think that was, again, an example where I should continue to remain humble, not boast, even to anyone, even if it's at home, but always remain humble before the Lord and have that spirit. The seventh point was again along the same line. Again, this is from 1 Samuel 10. When the Israelites decide to crown him king, he hides away. He hides away, and he hides away in the luggages. And the Israelites have to find him and then pick him up from there and crown him. And what I can learn from there is he was not someone who sought honor, even though if it was something that he rightfully deserved, because he was anointed king. He was uncomfortable receiving that honor. He was not happy. He wanted to be hidden. He wanted to remain hidden in whatever it is. And that's, again, a lesson for me when I do something, be it for the Lord or be it, at home. I can see that there's always an urge for me to put my name and put my face. And even if it's at work, I see how easy it is for me to put my name to it or put my face to it and kind of want to make sure that everyone knows it was me who did it. And that is stark in contrast to what I see from here. This spirit to hide, this spirit to put my face to the dust and stay hidden, let no one know that I've done what I've done. That's absolutely fine. I think that's something that I was challenged by the Lord to remember in my heart, that even though people may want to honor or say something good or whatever, I should have that spirit in my heart where I can want to genuinely hide away from all of it and say, Lord, I don't deserve any of this. It is you. And it may not be possible for us to do it on the outside. If someone, appreciates us, we definitely have to, thank them and accept it, fine. But the spirit in our heart is what I think I've been challenged with the most. Do we immediately go to the Lord and say, Lord, this blessing or this encouragement that I've received or this gift that I've received, I am not worthy of it in any way. I want to lay it at your feet. The world may not know it, but I know it in my heart that I am not worthy of it even one bit. And I want to hide away from all of it and just lay it at your feet. That's the picture that, again, I was reminded of as to how I should be careful to guard my spirit and guard my, my inner life when I receive something good or some encouragement from someone. And the eighth one, this is now after he becomes king. He is crowned king. And as soon as he's crowned king, there are a few people in the land of Israel who say, this is Saul. This is just someone from the tribe of Benjamin. We're not going to submit to him. We're not going to, accept his authority over us. And what did he do? Chapter 10, verse 27, it says, Saul ignored them. He just ignored them. Saul was now king, so he could have easily said, arrest those guys and imprison them or even kill them. But he doesn't. He says, that's fine. Let them say what they want. I don't want to get offended. I don't want to get insulted. I'm fine. This is, again, a very, very important lesson that I was challenged by. It's easy for me to be offended, again, within the realms of my home, again, within the realms of, someone that I may have authority over. And that was where I was thinking, Lord, teach me to not get offended. When something is said, I don't want to immediately, respond back in anger or respond back in a way that forces my authority over them. That centurion in the New Covenant, he says, I am a man under authority. Therefore, I have authority over others. And that's the picture that came to me. It's not about enforcing or pushing my authority over others. As long as I remain humble and faithful under the authority of the Lord, whatever trouble or challenges I may have elsewhere, the Lord is faithful to help me. And I don't want to get offended. I don't want to be disturbed in my spirit or troubled in my spirit when I face some of those situations. Again, a very strong example as to how to deal with someone when, if they're trying to offend us or insult us, to not get offended and not have any spirit of anger or grudge against them. The last point, again, from the lessons I can learn from Saul are his forgiveness. Again, the last 2 points are actually tied. So after Saul is crowned king, these people don't, some of the people don't respect him or submit to him. They rebel against him. And then Saul goes on and fights with the Ammonites in chapter 11. The Lord is with him and defeats him, defeats the enemies mightily. And now the whole of Israel is kind of united with Saul because they can see that the Lord is definitely with Saul and that their enemies are being defeated. And his army people tell him, you know what, Saul, now is the time to get even at those people who didn't, who insulted you in the first place. Let's go and let's kill them. Let's execute them. But Saul's response in chapter 11, verse 13, he says, no one will be executed today, for today the Lord has rescued Israel. Saul could see it in his heart with all truth and honesty and say, this victory of mine was not from me. It was not my strength and valor. It was the Lord who defeated the enemy for me. Therefore, there is no way I can lord it over anyone, or no way I can kind of, brag about it. No way I can take that victory to someone who doesn't agree with me and then kind of, force it on them or, punish them. He had that spirit of forgiveness. He didn't want to get even at someone who insulted him, even though he was king. And his spirit of confessing victory was not from me. It was the Lord who gave us victory over our enemies. Again, a picture in all these things, what I see in my heart is the foreground in everything of Saul's dealings was the Lord. He had the Lord at the foreground. He had the Lord front and center. And everything else was around that. Everything else was around his life being centered with the Lord. And that is why he had wisdom. That is why he had humility. That is why he was able to forgive. That is why he never got offended. And a lot of these truths, like we see here, these are not just, old covenant truths of giving to the poor and, doing something good. A lot of these truths are new covenant truths that we learn about staying humble, about not being offended, not getting revenge, honoring people. A lot of these things are things that we can definitely learn from. And that's the first part of what I wanted to share, that I wanted to be, to be careful to learn from all these things that I can see from Saul. Now comes the second part of what happens with Saul. Saul falls away and he ends up terribly bad. But it all begins with a bunch of steps. And I think those are the warnings that I was challenged by, to make sure that I don't have any of those in my life. The first thing I see is in 1 Samuel 13, this is when Saul is going to fight against the Philistines. So Samuel tells him to wait for me, and I'm going to come and I'll offer up the sacrifices on the altar, and probably after that you can go to the war. But Saul stays, he waits there for 7 days, and he still doesn't see Samuel. And verse 13 says, he says, bring me the offerings, the peace offerings, and Saul sacrificed the burnt offering himself. Now, the picture that I get there is that after the victory he had with the Ammonites, and probably I don't know if there was any other battle, but there came a point now in Saul's life where he said to himself, I am important. I waited for 7 days for Samuel. He hasn't come. I think it's about time that I take it myself. I know what to do. I know how to do it. And he takes up that task of offering up the sacrifices on the altar, which is something that was, again, in disobedience to the word of the Lord. It was only Samuel and the prophets who were allowed to do it. But he steps across that boundary. As king, he had authority over Israel, but he wasn't a priest. He steps out of that boundary and into this area of being a priest and offers sacrifices to the Lord. That's the first mistake that we see. And this, again, is a lesson and a warning for me that I have to be very, very careful to make sure that I don't cross the boundaries of someone else's authority. It's easy to do this, outside at work. You know what authority someone has, so you don't overstep that. And even within the church, we know that. But when it comes to home and working with someone at home, it's easy to think, hey, these are my children. I can speak to them the way I want. I can tell them to do what I want. And there is a possibility that we could be overstepping and kind of crossing into the boundary of their dignity. That's something that I was really blessed by the first time I heard it from Brother Zach, that even a little child has a dignity, has a sphere, a circle of dignity that we shouldn't cross in, like disciplining children in the midst of others. And, that's one example. But to recognize that everyone has a boundary and I shouldn't cross into that. I shouldn't, barge into that and kind of laud my authority there, or my will there, or my wish there. And that's the first thing that really stands out. It looks like a very simple thing on the outside, but it tells me that Saul had something going on in his heart where he felt that I'm important. I can do it myself. I don't have to wait more than 6 days. So that's the first warning that I want to learn from that. Having patience, even if things don't go my way, to have that patience and humility before the Lord and say, Lord, you know best. I lay it at your feet. The second thing was foolishness. So like we saw in the first part of good qualities from Saul, where we saw about wisdom that he had, the second part of the warnings, we see that there's an act of foolishness that really stands out there. This is again with another war with the Philistines, I think in chapter 14. When everyone's fighting the war, Saul makes a very foolish oath. He says in chapter 14, verse 24, he says, "Let a curse fall on anyone who eats before evening, before I have full revenge on my enemies." So this is a war. His men are fighting war physically. And the first thing you want when you have men fighting at war is to make sure that they are as strong as they can be. They eat as much as they can so that they don't get tired, so that they're strong, so that they can defeat the enemy. And here you see he's saying, all of you soldiers must fast. You shouldn't eat anything until the war is won. It is, again, in my opinion, something that really is foolish, because his son comes down later. Jonathan comes up later in the same chapter and he says, that doesn't sound right to me. Why would you do that? It'll only hurt you. And the picture again is that the opposite of what was happening with wisdom. He feared God and therefore had wisdom, but now he was growing cold in his fear of God, growing less in his fear of God. And his wisdom was evaporating, in my opinion. He was becoming a little more foolish, a little more selfish in areas where he shouldn't have been. And the picture that I get is his lack of fear of God was actually helping him to become more and more foolish. This again is a picture that I can learn from. Am I growing cold in my fear of the Lord, or am I kind of being lukewarm, or am I, passionate and being fervent in my fear of the Lord? The next one is disobedience. I think, like we heard in the Sunday school story a few weeks ago, when he goes to fight the Amalekites, Samuel tells him, destroy everything. And what Saul does is in chapter 15, verse 9, it says, his men spared King Agag's life, kept the best of sheep, goat, and cattle, and the fat calves. Everything that appeared good to him, they kept, and destroyed only what was worthless and of poor quality. So it's a pure act of disobedience here. And in my opinion, what I felt, going on in his heart was, I know better. God wants me to destroy all these things, but I think I know better than God. I think the more I was thinking about it, any act of disobedience is because we think I know better. I know better than my mom or dad. I know better than God. I know better than whomever told me to do something. I know better than that. Therefore, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to do it in a different way. And that's what I think comes up here. He sees all these valuable things and says, why put them to waste? I can make better use of them. And he disobeys God. And, same chapter, he disobeys God, and the Lord is displeased. And Samuel, he goes out to search for Saul. He says, where is Saul? I need to go find him. I need to go tell him that he's made a terrible mistake. And Saul was nowhere to be found. In verse 12, it says, Saul went to the town of Carmel to set up a monument to himself. This really stood in stark contrast to me, because the first battle he went and fought, he said, victory is not mine, but victory is the Lord's. The Lord was the one who defeated the enemy. But now he's getting to a point where he goes and fights against the enemy, defeats them, and sets up a monument for himself. He's able to say to himself, this victory is mine. This overcoming the devil and overcoming the evil one is mine. It was me all along. And he sets up a monument. in a sense, he starts to glorify himself. So again, as the more I think about it and the more I ponder, the picture that I get is that throne where God was seated in his life was now becoming a throne where Saul was getting seated more and more. He was becoming more and more important in his life, more important than God. And that's one of the pictures there when after the victory, he goes and builds a monument for himself to glorify himself. Now, Samuel finally meets Saul and tells him, what you did was wrong. You disobeyed the Lord. The Lord wanted you to destroy everything, but you haven't done that. And there's a very, very interesting response that Saul has in 1 Samuel 15:21. He says, I did obey the Lord. I carried out the mission he gave me. I brought back King Agag. I destroyed everyone else. Then my troops brought in the best of sheep, goat, cattle, and the plunder to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. So the picture again is he wanted to offer to God that which cost him nothing. Whatever he wanted to give to God, it didn't cost him a thing, because these were not sheep and cattle from his kingdom. These were sheep and cattle from the enemy's kingdom, which he has now got for free because he's defeated the enemy. Now, this is something that stands in stark contrast to like someone like Abraham, for example. When he defeated the king of Sodom, the king would say, take up whatever you want to offer to the Lord. And Abraham would say, I'm not going to take even a shoelace from you, lest you say that I became rich because of you. And again, in the book of 2 Samuel 24, there's another passage where David, when he goes to offer a sacrifice after he's become king, the owner of the land tells him, take whatever you want. It's all yours. I'm giving it to you freely. And David says, I'm not going to offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. And I think that's what Saul is trying to do here. He's trying to offer to the Lord that which cost him nothing. And that's, again, a reminder that I had. Whatever I offer to the Lord, be it my time, my effort, money, resources, everything that he has given me, and the things that I give back to him, are they the best of what I have? Or are they the worst? If it's the worst, it is of no value to me. Just like we can eat a nice, chicken leg and eat the whole thing and just leave the crumbs. Am I leaving the crumbs for the Lord, which are of no importance to me? Or am I giving the Lord the best? Again, the picture of Cain and Abel was something that I was reminded of. So it reminds me that Saul's love for God, Saul's place for God in his life was getting away more and more. And he gets to a point where he couldn't offer something to the Lord that cost him something. He wanted to offer to the Lord only that which was free. Again, an exhortation to me to ask myself, what am I giving to the Lord? Is it something that costs me something? Or is it something that costs me nothing? The next point that stood out is, again, the same verse. There's one word that really stood out. He says, I've brought all these things to offer to the Lord your God. That word, your God, was something that really stood out to me. I looked it up in all the different translations or, all the different versions. It's the same thing there. So what I really understand from there is Saul was no longer having a personal walk with God. God was no longer his God. God was Samuel's God or Israel's God, but not his God. And the warning there I had was, it's possible for us to meet on Tuesdays and Sundays. And, if these are the only two instances where we hear from God, where we hear, something that, challenges our heart, or where we hear something from the Lord, and we don't spend time with the Lord any other time of the day, that's a very, very dangerous place to be, because then we become, that's an example for us. It can be that God is your God, and, I can take part in a meeting and I can hear something at that meeting, but the rest of the time, Monday to Friday, any other time, there's no relationship between me and God. There's no walk between me and God. That's, again, a very, very dangerous place. I think, that was one of the exhortations that I felt was very important, to always have a personal walk, irrespective of when we meet or what we hear, to always have a walk with the Lord. And that's something that I see here that Saul misses out. He misses out on his walk with the Lord, and the Lord becomes someone else's God and not his God. The next thing that stands out is, dishonoring elders. So like, a lot of these things are contrasting what we saw in the earlier passage. So earlier he honored Saul. Now what he did was, when Saul points out his mistakes and says, I'm not going to come and return with you anymore, Samuel leaves him, and Saul forcibly yanks his robe behind him and it tears. And I was thinking to myself, Saul would have probably used a lot of force to yank Samuel back. And the thing that stood out to me was, how much would he have had, there would have been almost no respect in his heart, or the respect that he had almost vanished. There was no respect for godly people anymore. And in 1 Samuel 22, there's another passage where Saul is so angry at, a group of prophets who helped David, and he kills all of them. He says, you are the Lord's prophets, and I'm going to kill you. And he kills all of them. So it's again a picture where the Lord was not getting, was of no importance to Saul. And now prophets of the Lord, people who serve the Lord, people who've blessed him before, are now becoming of no importance. He begins to dishonor them. Again, a warning that I can learn from. The next thing was, I think it's in the same passage, 15, 1 Samuel 15. What Saul now says is, after Samuel tells him, I'm going to leave you, I'm going to go back, I'm not going to come return with you. In verse 30, 15 verse 30, it says, Saul says, I know I have sinned, but at least please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel by coming back with me, so that I may worship the Lord your God. This is chapter 15 and verse 30. So the picture that I get there is, sin was not really important for him. He said, okay, I sinned, and even if you don't forgive me, that's okay, but come and honor me so that others will respect me. So again, that slippery slope where Saul was seated on the throne more and more in his inner life is becoming more and more evident to me. He's more, he's more taken up with others honoring him. He's more taken up with what other people think of him. And at this point, he's saying, I'm okay if you don't forgive me. I'm okay if you don't, if I've sinned, that's fine. I'm okay if you don't forgive me. But at least come and honor me. Come with me and just stay there so that others will honor me. What a drastic change to how it was before, where he didn't want honor before and now he wants honor. And again, it's a warning. If there is any honor seeking in me, I can faithfully go to the Lord and say, Lord, I've slipped up somewhere. This is leading to something worse. And before it gets any worse, Lord, please help me repent. Help me to find out what it is, that I will not crave and be eager to seek for honor, or crave and be eager to seek for respect. The last two are probably things that we've already seen in the stories. One was jealousy. David comes in, helps Saul by defeating Goliath, and the people of Israel say Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul, instead of thinking, David has helped me, David has helped the kingdom, even though he's younger, he's helped me. Instead of kind of being happy about it, he gets tremendously jealous. That's again a picture that we can all ask ourselves. Do we get jealous when someone younger is able to do something more than we can? If someone younger is getting popular, do I have a spirit of jealousy in him? I may not make it visible in any way outside, but how is it in my heart? Does it fare well in my heart, or is my heart disturbed? And that's another picture that I can really take home and say, Lord, these are things that I can examine my life. When I look at something going around, or when I see something happening, I can use this as a warning to say, Lord, yes, there's a little bit of jealousy in me there about this or about something there. And we, if we are faithful to go to the Lord and ask him to help us, I'm sure he is more than able to help us, and more than able and more than faithful to help us. But to recognize these areas is what I think I was really exhorted by. The last point in terms of the warnings from Saul is again anger. Again, like I said, we've heard this. We know this. He would get angry at David and kill him, or try to kill him. And in chapter 20, there's a verse which I think I saw for the first time. Saul was even angry at his son because he knew his son was helping David. And he hurls tremendous abuses at him. Verse 30, he says, uh, Saul boiled with rage, and he swore at him. He says a lot of shameful things at Saul, at his son Jonathan. And then 33, he hurled his spear at Jonathan and tried to kill him. It gives a picture of how extreme his anger was. And today we might not hurl spears at our children, but we could be hurling words. We could be hurling words that could pin them, that could discourage them. And that is one area that I was especially reminded. I may not have anger on the outside in the world, on the road or anywhere on the outside, but in my home, if there is anger, that is something that I should never, ever tolerate. It's fine to discipline children. We know as parents we have to discipline them and correct them. But if I do it with anger, that is something I need to be faithful to repent of. If I don't recognize it and think it's okay, I'm on a slippery slope. That was what I was, reminded and warned by. To not be content or not accept that anger when I discipline my children, but to go before the Lord and ask the Lord to help me overcome that anger. And I can see that faithfully. The Lord has been teaching me ways of how I can discipline my children, without getting angry. He's been giving me wisdom in certain areas where I can discipline them in a measured way, in a calm way, without expressing anger like I used to before. And I think that's the thing that the Lord wants us to do, is to be faithful and ask for help. None of us are perfect, but if we can heed from these warnings, and anytime we see them in our life, all we need to do is go before the Lord and say, Lord, help us. We don't know why it's happened, but I know it shouldn't be happening. Help us, teach us, give us light that we will be overcomers. The last point I wanted to share was Saul is, we just heard about some of the warnings and exhortations from Saul. And David, who comes and follows Saul, David, as the Bible says, is a man after God's own heart. He starts off well. He does fall into adultery at one point, but then repents, comes out of it, and he finishes well. And even Jesus is called the seed of David, the descendant of David. That is how significant David's name is to the Lord. And one thing that stood out to me was Saul and David were probably they were not too many years apart, but they still lived in the same times. What was so different about David that allowed him to remain humble, allowed him to stay humble, as opposed to Saul, who started well, but the moment he became king, the moment he got power and authority and the authority of kingdom, he began to grow corrupt. But how did David stay humble, and how did David stay a man after God's own heart? And what I think happened is because David went through tremendous trials. Saul never went through a single trial in his life. It was an easy path for him. He never went through trials. But David had trial after trial. Almost all the Psalms were written probably when he was running from cave to cave, hiding from his enemies, hiding from Saul. And therein in those trials, he was broken. And I think that is what helped him after he became king. Even though he fell into sin, he repented. He stayed a man after God's own heart because of that brokenness in him through all the trials that he had gone through. And James 1:2-5, that's a verse that we've all probably read in our Bible study. It talks about when we face trials, remember that those trials are working out something good in you. It produces faith, and that faith and that patience and whatever it is that it is working in you, that endurance is there so that it'll make you perfect and complete, lacking no good thing. So these trials we face in our lives, they help us stay humble, not just when we go through them, but also when we come out of them, when we overcome them. Just like Peter remained broken after he denied the Lord, these trials keep us broken, keep us, with our face to the dust, and enable us to not go down that slippery path of Saul, but rather stay true to the Word of God and stay true to what the Lord wants us to do. So these are some of the things I wanted to share from what I was blessed by. Thank you for your time, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, Brother Satheesh. It's my prayer that what we heard becomes part of our lives. Now, at this time, we'll hear from Brother Joe.
Am I muted?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, brother. I get where this has come from is I'm going to go to 1 John chapter 2 verses 15 and 16. But I'd like to share. This is something that's been on my heart since we finished up the New Testament. Theme that's kept coming back to my life, and as we read and we go into it, is there are definitely things of the world that we all see and agree that is not to be part of our lives, but yet in a way there's a good part of the world that we have to involve ourselves in. And then I'm going to end with a verse in Revelation, but for the times that we live, but I'll read a couple verses there. Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And so that what I see there in verse 15. And I had to think what Brother Praveen shared a couple weeks ago about having light. We so desperately need the light bulb of the Holy Spirit in our lives to turn on, because in our own personal lives, because we can't determine this from myself to my children, even to my wife, or to you, brethren or sisters, what the world is and what the world's pull in our lives is. And I see, even for me, the world has a definite pull. It's, as Christians, we're to work hard, we're to succeed, we're to do the best job that we can in whatever God has given us to do, whether that's in our home, what we're able to do, and not so much on what we can't do, but what God has given us to do. And we're to succeed. But the time, I feel like the days we live in, I don't know, I'm not sure how much time God has for this earth, but what I see in verse 15 there is either we're loving the world, or we love the Father, or we love Jesus. And it's personally by the love of the Father. And it's clear that we cannot love the Father and love maybe even what He's given us in this time, even what He expects us to succeed in. There needs to be a separation in my heart from what God has given me to do, or God has blessed us with talents. Maybe we can make good food. Maybe we can excel in our work, and people say something to us. But there's a danger of coming to our hearts, connecting with that and loving it. And I see the danger, even as I'm getting older, of being vulnerable to that in my life. And I don't feel like I'm perfectly there, but in Revelations, and Brother Satheesh brought this verse up Tuesday night, but it's also been on my mind, to those who overcame. And I just like to focus on the last line of the verse, chapter 12, verses 11 at the end there. And they did not love their life, even faced with death, or maybe the separation of something that we love in our life. Is our love for Jesus, is my love for Jesus in my heart going to be great enough for Him that I'll allow myself be separated to God, even from things I love. And I think as we near the end, that reality in our hearts is going to be important. And it's something that God's been working in my heart. In sharing this, I don't feel it's perfected in me, but I desire the Lord to continually give me light and revelation and continually bring me there. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you, Brother Joe.